Hello, everyone. Hi. Thank you for saying it back. My name is Lily Williams, and I'm the manager of adult programming here at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. Thank you for joining us this evening for our conversation inspired by the exhibition Black Photojournalism. On behalf of the museum, I would especially like to welcome and thank our members who are here tonight. It is because of your generosity that our collection and special exhibitions are free and open to everyone. If you are not currently a member, I encourage you to visit by joining the membership table in the atrium or by going to cartermuseum.org. As a reminder, Carter members get a free drink every month during Second Thursdays. What could be more tempting than that? I would also like to thank the Art Bridges Foundation Access for All program for their generous support of Second Thursdays at the Carter. Every second Thursday, you can connect with art through cocktails, conversations, and creativity. Each month offers something a little different, and we hope you'll join us again soon. I'd also like to thank the students and faculty from Tarrant County College for providing American Sign Language interpretation for tonight's talk. Thank you. Before we begin, please take a moment to silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices. Thank you. I can see the people moving to do it. All right. Tonight, Kwame Samori Brathwaite joins Charles Wylie for a conversation about the art and life of his father, renowned photographer Kwame Brathwaite, whose work is featured in Black Photojournalism. As director of the Kwame Brathwaite Archive, he works alongside his wife, Robin Brathwaite, to steward the archive and advance projects that reflect the themes central to his father's work, including activism, politics, fashion, and music. He is also the producer of the award-winning documentary Through the Lens of Kwame Brathwaite, Black is Beautiful, which explores his father's life and legacy. Kwame Samori is also a managing director at Tavo Partners, a purpose-built investment and advisory firm focused on closing gender and racial wealth gaps where overlooked entrepreneurs emerge as the next generation of investors. Charles Wylie is the curator of photographs at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. He joined the Carter in May 2025 from the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, where he acquired 15 Kwame Brathwaite photographs, the first in 2018, and is the coordinating venue curator for Black Photojournalism. Following their conversation, we'll open things up from questions from all of you. I'll have a microphone so that your questions can be included in the recording of tonight's talk, which will be available on the Carter's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. Please join me in welcoming Kwame Samori Brathwaite and Charles Wylie.
I'm going to use this too. Thank you, Lily. Thank you for organizing tonight, and thank you everyone for being here. This is a spectacular showing of enthusiasts for the Carter and for Kwame Samori Brathwaite and the work of his father. I wanted to thank my colleagues, the curators at the Carnegie Museum of Art, who organized this exhibition. We're the only other venue for the exhibition. It was in Pittsburgh at the Carnegie in the fall, and now it is here and is on view till July 5th, so I hope you come back often. The curators are Charlene Fogy-Barnett, who's the Charles Teeny Harris Archive Community Archivist, and Dan Lears, Curator of Photography at the Carnegie. The exhibition is designed by David Hart, and the curators worked with a wonderful community of expanded network of scholars, archivists, curators, and historians. Significant support for this exhibition is provided by the Terra Foundation for American Art. Black Photojournalism has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, Democracy Demands Wisdom, and in-kind support for the exhibition has been provided by Herman Miller. The Carter's presentation of this exhibition is supported in part by the David H. Gibson Foundation, the Leo Pottishman Foundation, and the Alice L. Walton Temporary Exhibitions Endowment. In-kind support has been provided by the Fort Worth Report. On staff here at the Carter, this is the largest exhibition I've installed since I got here last May, and I cannot ask for a better group of people to work with. And I say this on behalf of myself and Elizabeth Doak, who helped me immeasurably in this exhibition. She is the curatorial assistant in the curatorial department. I'm also happy but not to tell you that the catalog for the exhibition, we had 130 copies in the store, but it is sold out. So I'm happy not to tell you that. If you want to order a copy, you may do so at the store. We are taking pre-orders and we can ship them to you. We are getting 30 more, but we hope that they will be here for this weekend. But I think that tells you a little bit about how great a response it has been in our community. And speaking of that, I really want to thank our partners, the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society, Deborah Tate Lewis, Interim Executive Director, board member and parliamentarian Ronnie Hunter, board president Brenda Sanders Wise, former executive director, executive board members, and historian Jane Higgins and Marisha Johns, board member, and Sandy Joyce, Madison Hogan III, Blake W. Mormon, and Freddie Watkins, who are our audio guide contributors. They were great partners in capturing memories of the photographer Calvin Littlejohn, whose grandson is here tonight in the front row. He is also Ron Abram, and Ron will be at exactly. So at 7 o'clock, Ron will be giving a presentation about his grandfather's work, as well as this series of photographs that have not been seen before of John Thomas's 1959 funeral service by Calvin Littlejohn at the Broadway Baptist Church. And I urge you to go into the library and see these. And John Thomas's family is here as well this evening. Where am I? So tonight, I am honored to speak with Kwame Samori Brathwaite, who joins us from Pasadena, California, about the art and life of his father, Kwame Brathwaite. In 2018, you will see Santa Barbara Museum of Art purchased this photograph, this self-portrait. This was the first of 15 photographs that I acquired while a curator at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and that's how I got to know Kwame and Robin Brathwaite. What I'd like to do, the clicker is on the table, though. Sorry. What I'd like to do is just give a little bit of overview of Kwame Brathwaite's work that's on view upstairs in our galleries, just so we have images in mind as we discuss. This is the self-portrait. That's Kwame and Robin. And you'll see that we used this self-portrait for our opening banner of our renovation. The exhibition was called Facing Forward. I love this photograph from the very start. If it's ever missing from your inventory when you go to look for it, you know where to find it. I've stared at this photograph forever and ever and ever, and it's just such an immediate, wonderful invitation to talk to the artist, I think. And the camera is right there in the center, so you are the subject. There's so many different layers that are going on in ostensibly a very simple classic composition. These are two others that I acquired that are upstairs in the career that began with gelatin silver black and white photographs. And this is part of his reportage that Kwame will be able to talk about. I think you recognize these people. This is the image that we used for our billboards and in our publicity. I also bought this for the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. Changing Times. It's a shift in tone in a really wonderful way. Oh, sorry. And this is upstairs, this marvelous symbol of unity. Sorry. And then what we'll also talk about is the idea of fashion and celebrity. And Grace Jones is the person you basically see as you leave the exhibition. So you get a sense of the range of Kwame Brathwaite's work in these images. So this is not the first time that Kwame and I have talked. We actually did a YouTube interview live during COVID, February 17th, 2021. If you go on YouTube, I had the date. If you go on YouTube, you can watch it. And what was special about that to me, special and also nervous-making, but special about it was that Kwame told me that his family, including Kwame Brathwaite, was watching us discuss when they were in New York. We were in Southern California, and they were in New York. And it was on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. And while I never met him, I'm very gratified to know that he saw me talking about his work, and that meant a lot to me. It was also nervous-making to hear, oh yeah, by the way, my family's all watching. In any case, we did that, and that conversation was virtual, and tonight, over 5 years later, this one is in person, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So I wrote a few questions, but this can be very, free form.
Yes.
But what I wanted to talk about, first of all, because it's such a great story, and your father's life really reads like a novel, and his discovery of the camera, and by the time he was 18, he was already, taking photographs, and you have to tell the story about the bar too. So. Tell me about how he came across the camera and his early experience with photography.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you. It's always great to be in conversation with you, but thank you for the M and Carter for having me. And thank you all for being here, because I appreciate that you took time out of your schedule just to be in this space. So that is something that I appreciate. As I said before, this is the equivalent of my golf, running this project. We have 3 children, and so I dedicate my time very specifically, and for you to be here and to be engaged is really, it means the world to us. Because when we started this, no one knew who my father was. So it's really beautiful to see all these faces from so many different backgrounds. As far as my father and discovering the camera, one of the things that was, so we have to start off with where he went to high school. So he went to School of Industrial Arts. So he went essentially to learn graphic arts. My uncle, who was his older brother, was also there, and there was a group that was there, artists, actors, all creatives. They kind of formed their friendships. And as they had graduated school, they formed a jazz society. They love jazz, they love bebop, and so they started listening to jazz in my grandparents' basement in the Bronx and other places. They really just became these aficionados of jazz. So much so, and they had learned so much about jazz that they decided that they wanted to put together their own concerts. Now, this is in 1955, 56. As you'd imagine, New York, like other places, was segregated, so they couldn't actually go see the performers perform at the places they were performing, but they knew where they went to eat. So they would go to the diner that they would all go to after their performances, and because they knew so much about jazz, they would put together the bands. They couldn't get the headliner because they were signed to like a Blue Note or whatever it was, but they could build the rest of the band. So they were like, oh, hey, you want to come do a show? And put the band together. They got a cabaret license. Mind you, they're 17, 18 years old. So they get a cabaret license and start putting on these shows in the Bronx and Harlem. So at first it was doing it for, just their pleasure and bringing the people that they loved up into these spaces. And, people started gathering and started being a very popular thing. And there was a photographer who had come and photographed one of the shows, and he brought it back the next show. And my father said, "Let me see those pictures." And he saw how beautiful. He said he fell in love with like the graininess of it, and just the temperature and the fact that he was able to capture that moment. And he realized, he was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to do this myself." So he went, and for a graduation present, he got a camera, like one of the brick, the first, like one of the first cameras that you get. And he was like, okay, I got to learn how to do this. And so that was his real introduction to something that was a family gift, and it was a combination of the things that they were interested in and his love of what he had seen, the end result, and really just falling in love with that. And so then he was like, okay, I have to document these things that we're doing. And so that was the beginning of his relationship with the camera, and it's really interesting that he found it at, the age of like 17, turning 18.
Right.
Yeah.
And the connection between what he loved and created and then was able to capture.
Right.
I think that is very important. Excuse me, because it wasn't just about taking pictures, it was about taking pictures about something.
Right.
And content was very important to him.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he understood, the ebbs and flows of the music, right? The best, and I see a few photographers in the audience, the best photographers are able to connect with their subject in a way that's more than just someone standing there taking a picture, right? When you understand the heart and you understand what's being conveyed in the music, that was part of how he was able to capture those moments. Okay, here comes the crescendo. Here's when these things will drop and the ebb and flow. And so his understanding of music really was the beginning of mastering his craft in understanding when and how to capture those moments. And ultimately, and this is a theme throughout his work, is really just capturing these moments of truth and wanting to convey and portray to the audience that would see the images later. He wanted them to feel what he felt when he was in that moment.
I remember talking to you about this in terms of his technique, that he would wait. Like he wasn't, shutter mad.
Right.
He actually would wait to see what he wanted to capture.
Right. Well, that was also a matter of cost, right? Right? That's film. So you couldn't just shoot away like you do now in digital. And I learned that too, because at one point I thought I was going to get my MFA in photography, and I was shooting film, and I was like, "Ooh, this is expensive." So he learned very quickly that you had to be very thoughtful in the way that you went about capturing images. And also when you think about, and I think he describes this in the documentary. There's a really good sequence in the documentary where he talks about, having the flash bulb. You had to, you catch it with the flash. You have to unscrew it, but it's hot. You have to shake it and take it out. Like the process of doing that was very different.
Yeah.
And when digital had started to make it started to emerge, he really embraced it as well. But he was one of those people that really understood, okay, I have to be very skillful with what I'm doing. And later on, as we started going through his work, you got to see, all the moments leading up to the quintessential photograph that he actually wanted to put out into the world. So yeah, it was a matter of understanding your subject, but also being patient enough to capture those moments in the right spot.
I think that one of the things about the show that I've been really engaged with and that I talk to people about is the deliberate nature of a photograph. And that while photojournalism is perhaps more spontaneous, there's nothing that you're seeing up there that isn't deliberate and that wasn't chosen for you to see,
right,
which I think is important. So the music is part of the background, and then art, and then he was part of this really wonderful group of young people that was active in the milieu from which Black is Beautiful arose.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so, that group of jazz aficionados started off as just listening to jazz and putting on these concerts. And so as they became more aware of what was happening socially and politically around them, really the death of Emmett Till and those images impacted my father a great deal. And so what they started doing was saying, okay, we have to make sure, one, the music, more so than now, and there's still to some extent the case, the music that came out of Black culture was very much a reflection of what was happening in the world. And so the music was a reflection of that. They wanted the representation of these shows to also reflect that. So as they started becoming more aware politically of who they were, Pan-Africanists, Garvey, Carlos Cooks, they then started incorporating that into those shows. So the shows went from just a nice jazz set to, okay, we're going to incorporate African dance. We're going to talk about the things that are happening in the world because at that point in time, you're talking about 1955, 56, there is no country on the continent that has gained their liberation. And so they start incorporating a lot of that into what they're producing in these shows. And they changed the name. Originally, it was the Jazz Art Society. They changed the name to the African Jazz Art Society because they wanted to represent that ancestry. And mind you, this is in 56 when, as a group of people, we're still referring to ourselves as Negro. They decided to go African because they wanted to establish that connection with the continent. And that's where the foundation of the work really started. A lot of the people who were just interested in the jazz kind of dropped off and didn't want to become more political, but they as a group then formed the African Jazz Art Society. Later, they got the studios for the acronym AJASS, AJAS, to then say, okay, here we want to do something, we want to change what's happening in the world, and we're using music, we're using photography, using cartooning, we're using poetry, all of it to communicate messages to our community. And so that's initially how AJAS started. And then, as a result of every year in New York, there's the Marcus Garvey Day Parade. And as part of the parade, the African Nationalist Pioneer Movement would have a Miss Natural Standard of Beauty contest. And that's where women would be in this contest. They would have to not straighten their hair, little or no makeup, and then talk about what they knew about what was happening globally. And the winner, oftentimes, and this happened in 1961, the winner had come back from winning her prize money and her hair was straightened. And my uncle was like, well, they're like, why is your hair straightened? She goes, well, I can't go to work like this. And so my uncle said, we have to do something for these women to feel proud of who they are and not ashamed to wear their hair in the natural state. And so that was in 61. So in 1962, January 28th, 1962, a year important to you. Charlie was born in 62.
Yeah.
They had the first Naturally show. And the Naturally show was where they essentially debuted this group of women. Carlos Cooks referred to Africa as Grandassa land. So they were called the Grandassa models. And the first 8 models essentially performed on stage and did a pageant and, represented African standards of beauty, but also then African attire. They made their own clothes. Those women and the AJAS became the collective, became the entire collective. One of the things when I was going back and when we were doing the work of putting together our book that we had with Aperture, is I was concerned about what that male-female relationship was going to be back in 1961, 62. But one of the things that was really incredible to me was that they were all equals and it was all collective. And so when they were deciding what to do, it was everyone chiming in to really talk about how they were going to represent the things that they were putting in these shows. But it was everything from political satire to people talking about buying black and creating their own goods and selling them in the space. So that collective started off with some guys in high school who were all friends, and then ended with essentially a group that went out into the world and expressed in that first show that Black is Beautiful, and that's how the Black is Beautiful movement was born.
It's an incredible story.
Yeah.
That's what I mean about saying it's like a novel. You live in LA, you should option that story.
Working on it.
So
after I finish my voiceover work.
One of the exciting things when I got to Fort Worth was in this job was that this exhibition was on the books, and I was asked to take charge of it. And what was great is that your father's work, obviously, had much experience with, and he was a photojournalist.
Right.
And the great and wonderful, kind of hinge that the work, or the place where the work exists is art and documentation. Mm-hmm. And I, especially that again, I showed you that, that's right. These two just are incredible photographs. They're square format. And this is the one Charles Peaker, street speaker, have an AM, PM. So this is what I'm talking about in terms of what his eye was able to capture, because this person is behind, you're seeing from behind, and so it's kind of a surrogate for you. And then he is speaking off to someone over here, a crowd over here, and so your eye is drawn over there. The angles here are such that, something is awry, that he is trying to address, I think. And, that angle of the post there, it has these things. Buy Black is right there. And then the street signs, which are also in there, which are pointing this way. So everything is going that way. And there's also no, and just this kind of he's kind of saying no. This will not stand. And so something again that is so ostensibly simple in a certain way becomes incredibly complex when you start looking at it. And that's something that a photograph can do that nothing else can do. Because it also records this important historical event. On 125th Street. And then here, this gentleman in the chair, again, how he frames where he is seated. He is framed by the pole there and then his ladder. Can you talk about this one a little bit?
Yeah. And this is why doing stuff like this is so much fun, because we have a relationship, as you can see. But Charlie is really receptive in his in even his approach to photography. I have to just share this. So the first time we met, he comes to the gallery. He knew the gallerist that we work with, Philip Martin, and he shows up and he has our book and he has pages dog-eared. And I'm like, wow, he's really been in this work, which is amazing. The thing that's really amazing about this is that, so as you can see, the Buy Black and the American flag, Charles Peaker is standing on that ladder. That ladder essentially lives on 125th Street. It's the same ladder that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar refers to, him going to 125th to see Malcolm X speak. So that ladder has its own, it's its own entity, it's its own life. And the way that these two, you see it in use and you see it in space. The other thing that's really amazing about this is that you have this kind of commentary on, the American flag and this ladder that looks kind of rickety, but it's also a place where people learn truth. And then behind it is Michaud's Books, which was a famous bookstore in Harlem. And Michaud's motto was the house of common sense and proper propaganda. And so at Michaud's, you could go and you could read books that were about what was really happening in the world. And so the juxtaposition of the cobbler with his head down looking somewhat distressed with the ladder, and then Michaud's Books behind it, but then also in relation to this and the understanding that this object is actually an entity in and of itself. I just love the framing, what he's doing, how he's pulling these things together, and just the vibrancy and the importance of 125th Street in any struggle that you're talking about when it comes to Black culture. So it's that's one of my favorite shots. It's so, it's in your face but kind of subtle in the same way. So yeah.
Yeah, that's what again, it sounds like I'm bragging, but maybe I am. But, I acquired these two as well. These are two of the 15 that I acquired.
Right. No, and honestly, it's really impressive because as an archive, we're a 501c3 that takes, there's an acquisition, somebody like a Swiss Beach and Lisa Keys buys a print, and then we take that and we put it back in the archive because, as people who run archives know, it takes a lot of work to kind of maintain and build those things. So all of it is really helpful in helping us to continue to tell the story, to help us to continue to educate people. And so when you have people like Charlie who have, started off as, a curator that my gallerist knew, who's now our friend, that's that dedicated to really telling these stories, those are the type of people that you want to have relationships with. And, there are places where you would think our work should be that it's not, but it requires that sense of knowledge, honoring the story, but also the curiosity to kind of learn more. Because oftentimes, like I said before, we started this 15 years ago, and when we first started, no one knew who my father was, other than the people who were, in the struggle with him. And so to be in a place where we have grown the awareness around the work, it's people and partners like you. So I greatly appreciate you and all the work that you've done.
Of course. So this talks about, his work as an artist, but he was, again, a photojournalist. And can you talk about his career?
Yeah, it's interesting because my father starts off obviously doing the work with AJAZ. So they're doing this, they're building the Black is Beautiful movement. He's also simultaneously learning more about what's happening on the African continent. A lot of the essentially people who are struggling to gain independence in those countries are coming to Harlem and connecting with AJAZ because they would then teach people in Harlem what was happening with things, these places around the country, globally. And then also providing boots and books and supplies to help them in their liberation struggles. But then he is also, trying to make a living. And until about 10, 12 years ago, photography wasn't really considered a fine art. It wasn't a focus of collections. So his life was about creating opportunities for his art to be seen. And we have really just touched upon, in this first 15 years, we've really touched upon the artistry of his photography, but the writings, we're starting to move into that phase. He wrote for Blues and Soul magazine and then the Amsterdam News and all of these different periodicals because what was really important to him was obviously capturing us in our regalness, in our beauty, in our truth, but also telling the stories and making sure that people understood what was happening in the world. And a lot of it was through music. So as they established AJAZ as a studio, it was on 125th Street, it was a few doors down from the Apollo Theater. So he starts shooting at the Apollo. So it's like Motown 63. So he's got little Stevie Wonder and the Supremes and, all these people. And he then, because the owner of the Apollo knew him to be this incredible photographer, introduces him to the head of Blues and Soul magazine. And Blues and Soul was really trying to establish their mark as a magazine that kind of told stories about music around the world. And so my father and the head of Blues and Soul magazine essentially established this relationship where he would go out and photograph on their behalf, and he'd write the articles and send them. So he starts really developing his practice in that way. At the same time, he's, doing headshots and photo shoots for people who, want to become models and everyone from everyday people in the street to celebrities. And he's building his practice in those different ways. So he's tapping into, music and fashion and culture and politics, all of it. So when you think about how he starts shooting in 1956 and he ends around 2018, he has essentially, 60 years of diasporic global culture through some of the most important venues that exist in the Apollo Theater and others. So this career that he's building is, he's just adding more and more to it as he's kind of building up and he continues to write. He's writing poetry, he's writing all these different things, which we really haven't even start to dive into, but that's next on the list. But it's really, you really see him developing as a creative, and it's interesting. There's a photographer, Tyler Mitchell, and most people know Tyler because he was the photographer who photographed Beyonce on the cover of Vogue. Very young, talented photographer. He was at I was moderating a panel he was on, and we were talking about my father, and he says he was like the first millennial because he understood that the dissemination of information needed multiple formats. And for you to be thinking about writing and photography and doing it through music magazines and political magazines and all those different ways, he was oftentimes thinking more globally than your average person taking pictures about what the messaging is and how to convey that message, with really Black is Beautiful being the kind of through line through all of it.
And there's a marvelous photograph, not in the show, but focused on a young woman listening to a speaker, probably at a Garvey Day Parade speaker.
Yeah.
She's holding a New York Times magazine.
Yeah, the New York Times magazine, yeah.
And I remember talking to you about that, and you said just what you just said, that he was very interested in ideas of like how like you always had to be reading something.
Right.
Like you like information, you had to be gathering information all the time.
Sure.
And that photograph kind of, and she was also really intent on listening to the speaker,
right.
Which is, so it's a double communication.
Yeah.
But along with that then comes the transition from black and white, something like this, to color. Mm-hmm. Did he talk about that?
I think he talked, one of the things that we always discussed was the fact that he wanted to master each medium, and each one required something a little bit different, right? And film photography is not calibrated for darker skin, so he had to deal with managing that aspect of things in the dark room, right? You kind of adjust for that in the dark room. And so it was really important for him to be able to continue in a contemporary way to capture images that reflect, the times. I remember when I was his assistant at 16, I was carrying cameras, right? So I had a couple of cameras on me, and they were loaded, and they were, one color, one black and white. And so he would oftentimes, when he was shooting, he's like, pass me the color. And then I would, so he would load his cameras with what he was trying to capture, and he would oftentimes shoot something with both in mind, right? I think there's, and this is me personally, there's a timelessness to black and white where unless you can date someone by what they're wearing or they like have an Apple Watch on or something like that, like that's really the only way to date people with black and white. Whereas color, they're cues, right? They're cues to Michael Jackson's pants right there. This is 70s, you know what I mean? So it's like, but if that was black and white, it would be like, okay, I'm not quite sure, right? The color palette is different.
Right.
So he wanted to make sure that he was able to represent all those things, and they capture different emotions.
And it is interesting though, because there is this transition in photography where color was used just for advertising, just for, et cetera. And then it becomes like quote unquote legitimate, in the late 60s and into the 70s.
Right.
And so it's this to me is just spectacular.
Yeah.
And when I saw this, one of the interesting things that you and Robin have been doing, or was coming out with new bodies of work all the time.
Right.
And so I had to keep buying them.
Right. We have some new stuff now.
No, exactly. And so, yeah, exactly. And so, like, I would see, Philip would send a thing like, hey, we're having a show, and here's all this new work. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have to have that. And so this was one of them, and it kind of went not with the rest, but then it did. And I just remember talking to you about it and how rapturous it really is. And when you're talking about a time period, this definitely, being born in 62, this is what, 73, the 70s it's a new era.
Right. And the interesting thing too about that you can see in his work often is his backdrops. His backdrops really reflect, especially when you go in the color stuff, it reflects the time that we're in. So, the 60s, it was like super bright pastel-y, and then there's a shift. And the fact that this is another one, in a lot of my father's work, he didn't name, he was shooting quite a bit. I think he quotes something like 500,000 to 1 million images that he shot over the course of his life. And so you can't name everything. But the ones where there is a name, like this one, Changing Times, right? This was part of, so I remember this distinctly. It was a set of negatives. There were 3 across, and then there were 3 that were missing, that were not there, but they were part of Changing Times. And that one and 2 others had their names on them. So he was thinking about conveying these in a specific sense. And for us, finding things like that, that's gold. Because, when we're putting things out, for the most part, we're trying to follow somewhat of a blueprint that he left for us. Before his health started to deteriorate, we were talking about what he wanted to achieve and what things he wanted to address. But then when his health started to go, those conversations were a little less. There was less that we could glean from. But being able to see his vision for what he wanted and how he wanted them together is really a blessing. So we come upon that every once in a while where it's like one of those old poster boards that has the negative cut out and he just puts them together. Oh, wow. So now you're like, oh, okay, these belong together. This happened recently. There's a image that was in the Arkansas show that we had, and it was called Kwame Brathwaite, the 70s. And there's this group of these 4 women, and it was a purple backdrop, and they were in gold jewelry, and it was this really beautiful thing. And there were 2 versions, right? There were 2 versions, and we're like, which one do we like the most? And usually I defer to my wife because that's the smart thing to do. And we're looking, and she's like, there's something about this one that makes more sense. And I'm like, I don't know, I kind of like this one. And then we found a really large negative, and it was the one that she was like, no, I think it's this one. And he had made a larger negative, which I'm like, okay, this is the one he intended to go out into the world. And so there's sometimes clues, right? I feel like, little Mr. Machine Scooby-Doo action, we're trying to find where we're going. But then there are times when, we're flipping through or we're going through negatives and it's just like, oh my gosh, we have to print this, right? And so, right. And that happens quite a bit more often than not, which is why we are very intentional about releasing things, not to oversaturate the market, but also just to be mindful. It's like, we don't just release just to release. It's like, okay, is there something to be said with this work? Is there something that makes sense based off of what we're talking about?
And that's like classically curating a collection. Right. That, again, your father didn't take everything. He waited. Right. So there's that kind of through line of deliberateness, maybe, which is really kind of cool. And that brings me to my last question, because I want to leave some time for Q&A. Sure. You and Robin are in charge of the archive.
Yes.
And you said it started 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And you have this documentary that's blowing up. Yeah. Talk just a little bit about the archive, what you just mentioned being deliberate about releasing things, but what's the scope and what's the extent of it?
So currently, in the 15 years that we've been doing this, we've released about 300 images between the book we had with Aperture and the multiple shows. Like I said, there are about 500,000 plus images that we have to get through. We work with a working file of about 20,000 images. So in the office that I work at every day, there are about 20,000, negatives, original prints that are just around. And then the rest are in, cold storage at a fine art storage facility. And what we've done has been very specific, especially in the beginning as we were learning more, with having curators come and look and see what they'd like to do. So for instance, we just had a major university come last weekend, and they looked through and said, okay, here's the direction we want to go. We want to do a show in 2028. And so we start to work with them to kind of build that out. We're right now in 8 shows globally, 3 in Europe, 5 in the States. And the goal is really just to continue to have these conversations, but now to move from the beautiful portraiture that everyone's kind of fallen in love with to then now having more of his kind of what he wanted to talk about, right? So we're working with some of his writing, working at maybe that being part of the second book that we do. And then right now we have a documentary that had the election ended up differently a few years ago, would probably already be out now. But we're in the process of looking for distribution. It looks like we may have some distribution internationally first. So that's a good sign. But we'll be in Martha's Vineyard. We have something for Juneteenth in Oakland. And then I will be in London. We'll do a screening at the V&A in London. And then that documentary, Jesse Williams, the actor who's one of the first collectors of the work, he's an executive producer along with Swiss Feast and Alicia Keys, who've been really big supporters of the work as well. And we're in their giant show. So what we're really doing is continuing to build out, think about what's new. And then Jesse and I are going to co-curate a show of my father's work in LA in October. And then just continue to focus in on engaging people. I'm fundraising right now for the archive to try to finish to get the 500,000 housed and digitized so that it can then be a better resource for people. But this is the focus. Archiving that work, creating some strategic partnerships, either with institutions and or brands so that we can allow people to experience the work in different ways. So for instance, you said the book sold out here. We did for the first time, we dropped a merchandise. It was an image of Radia Fry, one of the women it's this beautiful blue image with this woman with an afro who lives in France, and we got her permission to use the image, and so now we're putting it on sweatshirts and skateboards and stuff like that. So it'll be fun to engage. Because one of the things I think is really important, and it really resonates with me because my father was 17 and 18 when he did this, I want younger people to experience this work. Because oftentimes, and you see many artists talk about how they went into these spaces and didn't see themselves on the walls. I want younger people to come up knowing my father's work and his contemporaries' work so that they can understand there's so much that we bring to the table from all different aspects of life. But also, and I say this to everyone, I'll say this to you as well, what's really interesting about what we're doing is that my father did something interesting, right? He had these beautiful this photography and these writings. But everyone and their family has something beautiful to contribute to the world. And so it's your job, I'm a steward of this work because I've chosen to do so, your job is not to let your family's legacy die with you. So go out, figure out you make the best cakes, or you crochet, or you tell the best stories. We come from an oral tradition. Pass those things down, take those things, and don't let it die with you. Make sure that it gets passed on to the next generations, because in this current climate of erasure, we have to protect those things. And so I always want those things to be in spaces with young people, because then it becomes that Obama head touch moment where the kid's oh yeah, I can see myself in that space. So that's really what we're trying to do. Continue to engage, continue to interact with younger people, younger curators, and just continue to have these amazing conversations.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's great. So, we have a few minutes, but I did want to remind people that at sometime after 7, Ron Abram will be talking about Calvin Littlejohn, his grandfather, in the library with these great photographs of the Broadway Baptist Church service in 1959 for Mr. John Thomas. Questions?
And I do ask, get my mic on. Hello? Thank you. I see my guy in the booth. If you do have questions, please raise your hand. It's important we get it in the mic so that we can hear you in the recording of this as well. So, do I have any takers for questions? Cool, I will be right there.
Hi. So when you started looking through and archiving all of this work, was there any photography subject or series of images that caught you by surprise?
You know, there's actually, there's surprises almost daily. I think when we started the process, one of the things that was really kind of amazing to me was, as his son, how much I didn't know he had captured. I tell a story about how they'd come to visit us, and he had this manila envelope, and in it he had two images. One was of the Righteous Brothers, David Bowie, Yoko Ono, John Lennon, and Roberta Flack backstage at the Grammys. And then, right, and then it was like, and then there was this picture of Ali at the Rumble in the Jungle. And it wasn't like the typical Ali where he's like hamming it up and smiling and being, you know, charming. It was this really pensive moment where my father said, oh, all the other photographers had left. And it was just me and him, and we were sitting there, and I just captured it. And I was like, why have I never seen these before? And he goes, I got plenty of images you've never seen before. And my wife and I looked at each other like, oh, wow, like we have to do something about this. So there are, you know, there was one where this is one of the ones we're going to release. There's one of Miles Davis at home at the piano, right? And he's just like there. And then a couple images that we're not going to release quite yet, but like they're images of his kid like playing, and him standing there and he's playing with his child. But it's like, here's one thing, like I said, the Apple Watch thing, right? So this dates the picture because he has a phone cord. He's sitting at the piano, and the phone cord is like long, and he's sitting there on the phone, on the piano, and I'm like, oh wow, that's really amazing. But like, they're constantly images that just kind of take your breath away. No.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know you talked about how your father was very intentional with his images. When you worked as his assistant, did he ever talk about what he was looking for, or just kind of casually say, all right, here's my process or something? Because I find with a lot of photographers, sometimes it'd be very casual when they capture a good image, like, oh, there we go. But, yeah. You know, I imagine your father, you know, he said all these images, like, oh yeah, I got a picture of Muhammad Ali, like, you know. What did he say when you worked as assistants, like on his process? Yeah,
it's funny. Thank you for that question. I talk about this a bit in the film, and he wasn't a man of many words. He's an old school dad. Like he was always traveling, he was always working, and so most of our conversations were like, "Hey, did you do your homework?" And I was like, "Yes." And he's like, "All right, cool." And then he went away and did what he was doing. But when I was his assistant, the times he was really talkative were in a dark room, and that was amazing because it was a time when it would just be silent and he's there, and all of a sudden he's like, hey, come here. And then he was teaching me how how he'd do his shading and his color blocking and some of the things that he was talking about. And then he would yeah, I'm always I want people to feel like they're in the space with us, right? Capturing this truth. He's like, everything's about truth. He's like, photography is one of the only places where, and this is for Photoshop, where you can't manipulate what's there. If you're capturing what you're capturing, it is the truth of that particular moment. And that's what he was always trying to get after.
So right here.
to kind of piggyback on what you just alluded to, I'm interested, have you ever explored any of the old type, like the gelatin daguerreotype of processing for the photos to bring that sense of nostalgia to your photos?
Yeah, you know, it's we did a tour at the Huntington Library in Pasadena, and they have daguerreotype. They have really beautiful daguerreotypes, and I was like, oh wow, this would be fun to kind of do. And I think at some point we'll experiment a little bit with that. For prioritization, it's like, okay, let's get everything organized, because what happens right now, of that 500,000, I probably have like 10,000 that I like can search and look and look through. The goal is to get it to a point where, and this happened not too long ago. So the Luther Vandross documentary, someone reached out and was like, somebody said your dad has pictures of Luther Vandross when he was young. And I was like, really? That's amazing. And then I was like, I don't know if I have those. And then they said, well, they sent us some. Can we use those? And I was like, well, let me see. Are you sure they're his? Because I don't want to take credit for something that's not his. And then on the back, it had Rodney Brathwaite. He was born Gilbert Ronald Brathwaite. He changed his name to Kwame Brathwaite. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is his. Then I look at the picture. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Because I didn't even recognize him because he was so young. He was part of a group called Listen My Brother, and they had performed in Harlem a couple times, and I go back and I found some more of the images, and I was like, oh my gosh. So a lot of times there's crowdsourcing that happens even with this. But to go back, yeah, we want to go into, doing more things. You know who's, I mentioned Tyler earlier. Tyler's doing a thing now where he's printing on mirror, and it is outstanding. I don't know if you've seen these. It is crazy. So you talk about seeing yourself in the image. So now you're there, and he likes to do a lot of stuff with water. So the water is now a mirror, and then you're looking at the image, and you're in it. So it's just this really amazing stuff. So I do want to experiment a little bit more with like what's like older formats and then newer formats for sure. But one of the things we're really focusing on is really prioritizing and getting the work complete.
Okay. Got one last question, I'm afraid.
Hi, my name is Rahel.
Oh, hi.
I'm a photographer and a curator, and I'm very, very close with my dad, and I'm a big Michael Jackson person, so this is all very, very joyful for me. But I was hoping somebody else would ask, but if you could please tell the story about the Jackson 5 photo, whatever you can. Like I said, I'm a huge Michael Jackson person. I think this is, even though it's not through, this is the closest I've been to Michael Jackson, just because you're a father, and I don't think I've been closer, so thank you for this moment.
Thank you for that. So the photo that you see here is from a trip that happened in 1974, and my father was the photographer who took the Jacksons to Africa. Yeah. Right. So they decided they want to go to the continent. He had a really strong relationship with the entire family. So he and this concert promoter, Johnny Secca, were the ones, and this guy who actually lives in our building, Steve Manning, who was really good friends with the family. They were like, oh, this is the photographer you want to have with you. So he went with them to Africa in 1974. And what's crazy is I knew the extent of it because there's a Blues and Soul article that he writes about it. And actually he talks about changing his name from Rodney to Kwame in that article. And it's in our documentary as well. But what I didn't know is all the footage and all the stuff that he had. And so there is a really deep relationship with them to the point where at one point my mom told me that she got a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was Joe Jackson, because before they had gone to Gori, people were asking them about going to South Africa. And my father was like, absolutely not. It will ruin them. they should not be supporting that because of what's happening with apartheid. So he was like, do not take that trip. And Joe trusted my father enough to say, okay, we're not going to do that. But then they went with him there. And so he was, I think it was like a couple-week trip where he was there, and they went to Goree Island, and they saw the point of door of no return. And it really kind of heightened their awareness around what was happening globally. Even in the documentary, there's a clip of Michael Jackson saying, like, I didn't think it was going to be like tall buildings and things. I just thought it was going to be jungle because of what was portrayed, you know, in the United States around what Africa was. And so they developed a really strong relationship. In fact, they were going to be in the documentary, but then Tito passed. So that ended up not happening, and we wanted to respect that space for them. But yeah, in fact, and going back to another question, like, are there things in the archive that are just, there was a time, Michael and my father were close enough that he told my father he was going to come sit for him to do a photo shoot, but he'd had a really bad vitiligo and acne outbreak. So he still sat for him, but my father said, never release these images. And so I have these images that we just have like tucked away. So there was that relationship that was there. So I didn't, this is like when the year I was born, so I didn't really get a chance to partake in all that stuff. But there's a picture of my sister with the Jackson 5 backstage one time. And then I guess, was it Rebe had a clothing store, and she gave my sister a leather jacket. So yeah, I missed out on that stuff.
Thank you again, Kwame. That was
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.